Sergeant Arturo had a mental routine that I repeated each evening in he front. Count to 100. Imagine the face of his daughter. Take a deep breath and don't cry. Paloma was 6 years old when he said goodbye to her in a uniform clean and promises he didn't quite understand. For 2 years, he survived the dust, the noise, and the fear, clinging to one image. His little girl in a hurry by a garden with the arms open. It was the only thing that kept it sane. When he was finally discharged and was able to return, your heart beat with a mixture of anxiety, joy, and a pinch of fear. It was said that everything there would be, it was worth it to see it. But what he found when he arrived, it was so brutal that not even war had prepared for that. The taxi dropped him off a square before, like there was planned, to give a surprise. He walked with a bag in his hand. He brought a doll dressed as a soldier, who had purchased in Europe, and the chest puffed up with pride. But as he looked out through the kitchen window, the world stopped. Paloma was in her floor, with the legs crusades, eating desperate for a plate dirty, a plate that Arthur recognized immediately. It was the one belonging to the dog that, according to his letters, sister-in-law Beatrice had died months ago. The girl did not speak, did not cry. She only ate with the animal emergency. Arturo stayed frozen, neither the bursts, nor the bodies fallen, nor sleepless nights in the war they had it shaken so. It was like if something inside him were to break without doing noise. A fracture that was not visible on the outside, but what would change all forever. There was no scandal. At that first moment, Arthur did not scream. Neither broke nothing. He entered the house like a ghost waking from a bad dream, took his daughter in arms and carried her out without saying a single word. Beatrice, seeing him, stammered, explanations clumsy, but he was no longer listening. Paloma clung to her neck with the strength of someone who feels safe, first time in a lot time. It was in that embrace that Arturo understood that the war had not finished. There was only changed scenery. And in this new front, its mission was still further urgent. Rescue your daughter not only physically, but also from the invisible wounds that already were beginning to form inside it. Snap History T this playing he heart. Subscribe to the channel. Only then we will be able to continue sharing stories that deserve to be told. That same one night, at Gabriel's house, his childhood friend, now a lawyer, Arturo sat in front of an untouched coffee cup and recounted what he had seen. Gabriel did not question unnecessary. I knew that Arturo was not a man of exaggerations. They called for a teacher at Paloma's school, a woman young called Emilia, who had shown worry in he past but never had evidence enough to act. Among the three began to unite pieces. Absences unjustified, changes in behavior, drawings dark. Paloma didn't speak a lot, but the little he said added to what he kept quiet, painted a picture terrifying. Arthur, with the discipline he gave him, army, organized a plan. This time he would not wield weapons, but documents, testimonies, and truth. He knew that standing up to the system I would be complicated, but I also knew that no one enemy was more stronger than the love of a determined father. The next day, Arturo presented a formal complaint to the local prosecutor's office. He had a folder with photos, notes, and a written testimony by Emilia about her behavior withdrawn from Paloma in class. The prosecutor on duty, a woman with a stern face called Lucia Velasco, heard in silence. He browsed the papers and looked up. "This won't be easy," he warned. "But if it's true, we're not going to let it go." Arturo nodded without blinking. He didn't need guarantees, only one way. Meanwhile, Paloma was taken to an assessment psychological. The psychologist, upon seeing her, noticed clear signs of malnutrition, withdrawal emotional, and a relationship traumatic with authority figures feminine. None of that. Surprise to Arturo, but each confirmation it hurt as a bullet that could not be dodged. Beatrice, upon learning of the complaint, acted with the arrogance of someone who knows she can go unpunished. She called acquaintances, manipulated versions, even presented a counterclaim claiming parental alienation. But Arturo did not let it happen intimidate. With the help of Gabriel and Emilia, he collected testimonies from neighbors, former employees of the house, and even from others, relatives who sometime they suspected but they fell silent. The story became irrefutable. Paloma had been abused, ignored and punished systematically during years. The local press began to interest in a case. A journalist called Valeria Ramos, specialist in children's rights, he asked an interview to Arthur. He accepted with a condition that never will show the face of his daughter. I didn't want to revenge neither scandal, just protection. But I knew that making the story visible could prevent others' children will pass for the same reason. Thus, your crusade began to take force out of the courts as well. The interview was published on a Sunday, and the next day the Arturo's phone never stopped ringing. Former soldiers, fathers, teachers, even repentant mothers shared their own stories of abuse hidden in homes apparently normal. The community, which had previously observed from a distance, began to mobilize. It organized a vigil in front of the courthouse with candles and signs reading, "Justice for Paloma," and "Silence also strikes." Arturo attended, but stood aside, watching from a distance with Paloma holding hands. I wasn't looking for prominence. His fight was not media-related. He just needed his daughter knew that his world was not always cruel, and that there was people willing to care, to see and to act. Meanwhile, the judgment was moving forward. Beatrice and her husband were summoned to testify. They tried to introduce yourself as victims of a family revenge, but it's contradictions that they betrayed him. The judge, a meticulous man with no patience for games, emotional, asked for an expert opinion, psychological, urgent. The evaluation confirmed patterns of abuse. Emotional, neglect and abuse, physical, mild but constant. Paloma, in her own recorded words, during the sessions, he said, "My aunt told me that if I was speaking, they were going to take me to a place worse." That phrase, it was enough for him. Judge would order a extent precautionary measure immediate. Provisional custody was granted to Arturo while it was being resolved his case. That night, for first time, Paloma asked sleep without the light on. Arturo didn't say anything. He just turned off the lamp and stayed by his side. Watching his dream as if it were him only duty that mattered. The following days were a learning experience, silent for both of them. Arturo, accustomed to the rigidity of the schedule's military, had to adapt to the pace unpredictable of a little girl wounded. Paloma did not cry, but neither played. He stayed sitting long hours looking out the window or drawing colorless figures. Arthur tried cook your dishes favorites, tell him stories. Of the sea, teaching them how to brush the cat they adopted in a shelter. Sometimes she responded with a smile fleeting. Others he simply locked himself away in same. But Arturo did not give up. He knew that healing was not a matter of days, and that true love does not require answers immediate. Every little gesture, a drawing with colors, a ask about his breakfast, one laugh unexpected, it was a victory. Gabriel and Emilia also followed close. Emilia started visiting Paloma once. Time by week, not as teacher but as a friend. She was wearing books, board games, and patience. Little by little the girl was uttering words, first timidly, then more clear. One afternoon, while they played at building a tower of blocks, Paloma told him, "My dad didn't leave. He was just fighting by me." Emilia looked at her with wet eyes and promised her that, this time, nobody I would leave her alone. Gabriel, for his part, was responsible for accelerating the processes legal. He managed to get the judgment will advance quickly unusual, presenting all the material they had gathered. Arturo did not attend every hearing, but received information detailed. I preferred devote his time to be with Paloma, to rebuild what the time, distance and negligence had tried destroy. The trial culminated after 3 intense months. Beatrice was condemned by abuse, child abuse. gross negligence and falsification of documents. There were lied about the information Paloma, doctors to avoid visits from social services. Her husband received a grief minor by complicity, but it was also disqualified from working with minors. The sentence was not celebrated with joy by Arturo. There was no victory in seeing a family member behind bars. But yes, felt relief, because at least now Paloma wouldn't have to come back to that hell disguised as a home. And because by first time in years, the law had state of the side correct. The judge, in a gesture unusual, he asked, "Speak with Arturo privately." He told him that his testimony and his temper had setting a precedent in the court. Arturo only responded, "I'm not a hero. I'm just a dad." Definitive custody. In hand, Arturo decided they needed a fresh start. He sold the family home, left the city, and moved to a coastal town where nobody knew his history. There, he opened a small home-cooked food place, with a kitchen open where the neighbors could see as he prepared tortillas, stews, and breads. Paloma helped him. In the afternoons, putting napkins on the tables or painting the menu signs. The sea, with its rhythm calm and his horizon infinite, began to clean the invisible wounds. Paloma began to sleep all night, talking to others girls at school, to draw with colors vibrant. Arturo continued having nightmares sometimes, but I no longer woke up alone, and in each gesture every day, a backpack ready for school, a laughter during dinner, a shared song in the kitchen, there was something that looked like miracle, a normal life. One winter afternoon, while we're preparing tamales for a local fair, Paloma asked quite naturally, "Did you also have fear? When did you get out of the war?" Arturo stopped, put down the wooden spoon and looked at her. It wasn't easy. Talk about the past, but I understood that Paloma needed answers, even more than him needed avoid them. They sat down on the terrace, with the sea in the background and a shared blanket on the legs. Arturo explained to him that the fear was not a weakness, but a sign that something important was at stake. "I was afraid many times," he confessed, "but the further big was when I saw that you had hurt. Nothing scared me more than that." Paloma heard him in silence, with large, serene eyes. Then he leaned over and gave her a long hug. "You don't have to have it anymore. Fear, Daddy. We're here together." That was a breaking point. Since then, Paloma began to show a security new. It was offered as representative of your class, wrote a writing that was read in his school event for Family Day, and began to learn guitar with a neighbor retired. Arturo, by his part, was invited to speak in a parents' meeting organized by school, where shared is a story without drama, just with truth. Many approached him then to thank him, to tell him things that had reserved during years. It was like this as, without intending to, he became into a reference for other parents, not for to have it made all good, otherwise for not having retreated when further mattered. And in that community knew, without a past that pigeonhole, father and daughter, they found something that looked like lost, the real possibility of returning to begin. With the time, Paloma began to show interest by help to others' children. In a visit to the center community of the town, saw a little girl crying alone in a corner and did not hesitate and sit at his side. He did. And do it questions, just accompanied her in silence, such as his dad there was made with it many times. That same late, he told her to Arturo, who wanted study to be a psychologist childish. "I want them children know that it is not your fault when they treat you badly," he said with a maturity that made Arturo feel a knot in the throat. He didn't respond with words, he just nodded while I was trying to hold back the tears. At that moment, she knew that the pain they had crossed together, there was no been in vain. Paloma was not only healing, she was transforming his wound in force. Arturo, by his part, he took up writing again, a passion that there was abandoned upon entering the army. It began with notes loose in a notebook old and finished writing a testimonial book about his experience. As a father and a veteran, I wasn't looking for fame neither sales, but Gabriel encouraged him to publish it independently. The title, It was Paloma's idea, the war I won without shooting. The work had good reception in veterans, circles and parents' associations. Some invited him to give talks, and although at first he felt out of place, with the time learned that his story was a tool, not to inspire, as they called it many, but to show that even in the worst scenarios, well-directed love, it can be a weapon of reconstruction, massive. It never showed up as example, just as someone who refused to abandon what you most loved. The little one restaurant that Arturo had opened with so much effort began to become a meeting point in the town. Not only for the food, tasty, homemade, served with love, but by the atmosphere that was breathed there. Photos of Paloma hung on the walls next to drawings facts by neighborhood children. In a corner, there was a bookshelf with books for anyone could read while ate. On Saturdays, they organized breakfasts, solidarity for families who were going through difficulties. The idea was Paloma's, who insisted in which always there was someone who needed more. That generosity, cultivated in the midst of pain, he became in the soul of the place. And Arthur, who had learned to live under orders strict, now found his freedom in the unpredictability of every day. One morning, while we're preparing the dough for the tortillas, Arturo received a letter with the seal of the Ministry of Defense. He thought it was a formality, administrative more, but when he opened it, he discovered that they had granted a special decoration for his service, not only in the army, but in the protection and defense of human rights. The proposal there was being driven by Valeria, the journalist, and signed by dozens of people who had continued his history. Arthur felt honored, of course, but also uncomfortable. That medal, for him, had a secondary value. The important thing was not the recognition public, but the fact that Paloma saw it like a hero in his life every day. When he read the letter, hugged him and said, "You deserve it, but for me you were already a hero since you broke up that door." Arturo didn't answer. He just lifted it up, in arms, like the first time, and they turned laughing through the kitchen. The restaurant also became a meeting space for veterans who, like Arturo, were looking for reintegrate in a civil life without feeling misplaced. Some they arrived in silence, with glances hard and backs tense. Arturo did not offer them advice, just coffee, warm bread and company. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't, but little by little, between recipes and anecdotes, these broken men found a place where they were not asked to be strong, neither brave, only present. Paloma was in charge of making them drawings, leave them notes that said, "Thank you for take care of ourselves," or simply that he listened with the patience that is rarely found to that age. For many of them, the Arturo's restaurant was not just a place. It was a second opportunity to feel useful, human, connected. One of those nights, after closing the place, Arturo and Paloma stayed cleaning in silence. Outside it was raining, and inside it smelled like soup newly made. Paloma, already 10 years, he asked, "Yeah, sometime there was thought in surrender." Arturo dried his hands with a cloth and looked at her seriously. "Yes, many times," he said bluntly, "but every time I thought about it, I imagined myself alone, waiting, and I couldn't leave you alone." Paloma lowered her head and murmured, "I also thought it wasn't going to happen, to endure, but you arrived." It was a brief, intimate moment where the rain hitting his ceiling, it seemed, accompany their emotions. There were no exaggerated hugs, neither tears, just that one certainty shared that both had resisted more than they thought possible, and that now were together so as not to let go, never. As time went by, the story of Arturo and Paloma began to be told, in schools, forums, community, and even in local television programs. But they followed, carrying a life simple. Arturo got up early, kneaded the bread, opened his restaurant, and Paloma went to school with her backpack full of colors and notebooks. Sometimes, when she returned, she found on the table a note that said, I'll wait with hot chocolate." Others, she left a card drawn with hearts saying, "Thank you for making me feel safe." They were small, Gestures that wove an indestructible bond between them. Neither needed big demonstrations. Their bond was strengthened in everyday life, in his share a meal, in his silence shared facing the sea at sunset. One autumn afternoon, Paloma found in the school library a book about resilience, children's book. He took it home and read it from cover to cover. That night, while we're having dinner, he asked her to Arturo. Yes, he knew that meant that word. It's when one breaks, and instead of staying broken, it rebuilds itself further strong, he explained, with voice calm. Paloma smiled and said, "Then I am resilient, right?" Arturo nodded. "You are the perfect definition." After that conversation, Paloma started to write a diary. At first, they were phrases loose, then short stories, then reflections. Emilia, her former teacher and now mentor, encouraged her to participate in a school fiction competition. Paloma hesitated, but Arturo convinced her. "Don't write to win, write to free yourself, everything you carry inside." And so he did. The story that Paloma wrote was titled, "The Girl Who Lived in a House Without Windows." It was a short story but powerful, where a girl was a prisoner in a dark house, until one day a figure with warm hands broke the wall and took it out into the sun. The jury was left shocked. Although her text did not mention names, neither facts real, her emotional charge was so honest that it moved everyone. In Paloma won first place in the category Childish and was invited to read her history in a school ceremony. Arturo sat down in the front row, with hands clasped on the knees and the heart beating strongly. Seeing her in a stage, confident and firm, she felt that everyone, the efforts, sleepless nights, tears contained, had it was worth it. After the event, several parents approached to Arturo with wet eyes, thanking him for sharing so much with so little. A mother confessed to her that her son also lived in fear at home, and that, upon hearing Paloma, she there was decided look for help. Arturo did not respond with speeches, only with a sincere handshake and a look that said, "You're not alone." That night, while they walked back home under a sky clear, Paloma asked him, could continue writing. "Whatever you want," he said, "and if someday you want publish a book, I'll take care of the first one edition." She laughed and replied, "But you make bread, not books." Arturo shrugged and joked, "Then we will do books that smell like freshly baked bread baked." And they both laughed, like, the pain sometime would have, it was just a bad dream. I would like continue knowing stories as this. Then subscribe. Your support us allows continue. Life in the People continued his course. But there was something changed at Arturo and Paloma's house. Now there was music. Emilia gave him a guitar used to Paloma in his birthday number 11, and she spent hours learning chords with tutorials and handwritten songs. The nights were no longer silent, neither loaded with shadows, but soft, full of notes, clumsy, but full of intention. Arturo sometimes sat to listen to her from the kitchen, in silence, letting each chord will wash him apart more of the soul. I didn't understand music, but knew recognize a sign of healing when he saw her. One night, without warning, Paloma asked him to sing with her. He laughed, shook his head, but he insisted. They ended up singing together, a song they invented there, same about tortillas, cats, and good days. As the months passed, Paloma began to form part active center community. He helped organize activities for children further small. I read stories in voice high and gave drawing workshops on weekends. His story, it was already known, but never was used as flag of sadness, but as example of how it can be done, flourish even in arid land. One day, a little girl arrived at the center with his eyes lowered and arms covered in bruises. Old people. Nobody said anything, but Paloma approached him and offered him a leaf and some colored pencils and sat down at his side. I didn't need to know details. I just wanted that one little girl knew she wasn't alone. Arturo, from the entrance, watched the scene without intervening, and in that gesture, silent, saw reflected everything they had accomplished. The center's psychologist community, seeing he bond, that Paloma created with the children. He proposed to include Arturo as assistant in some dynamic supervised. Although at first he hesitated, he didn't want to expose her to more pain. Paloma convinced him. "It doesn't hurt me, help me, heal me," he said with a firmness that disarmed any argument. Thus, he began to participate in activities guided, always accompanied, always respected. It was there where met Lalo, a boy small with mutism selective. Paloma did not try do it speak. He only taught him to express yourself with drawings, with gestures, with music. Weeks later, he whispered to her his first thank you. It was so soft it was barely audible, but Paloma heard it, like a cry of hope. That night, he wrote in his diary, "Today I understood that it is also possible. Speak with the soul." Meanwhile, Arturo received each time further invitations to share his experience in other cities. He refused many times, but Gabriel encouraged him to accept some. "Not for Yukai, but by who T listen," he told her. Thus, with a certain reluctance, he began to travel occasionally on weekends. Always came back with stories new, with books signed for Paloma, and with one look different. It started to understand that the story was not only a consolation, but a transformation tool. In one of those talks, one young man said to him, "Thank you for showing me that not everyone the men flee when a little girl needs protection." Arturo did not know what to answer. He just thought in Paloma and in everything there was made to deserve those words. That night, he wrote in his own notebook, "Sometimes you survive a war just to win other, further important." One day, in the anniversary of the opening of the restaurant, Paloma organized a surprise, invited to Emilia, to Gabriel, to Valeria, and several others children from the center community. Decorated he place with photos, balloons, and a banner that read, "Thank you for teach me to trust." Other time, Arturo, upon entering, stopped dry, not for the decoration, but from what he saw at the back of the premises, a mural that Paloma had painted in secret. It showed a house by the sea, with a girl and a man walking hand in hand, and a phrase written with letters great, "My home is where you are." He couldn't hold back his tears. He was not a man given to tears, but that image went through him. It was like, all the years of pain, struggle, and love will condense in that wall. That night, after the celebration, Paloma approached him with a new notebook. "I want us to write a book. Together, you count you part, and I have mine." Arturo looked at her surprised, but didn't say no. He thought about it some seconds and replied, "Okay, but you choose he title." Paloma opened it in the first page and wrote, "The place where we were born again." From then on, they began to meet each week to write. They didn't have hurry, neither intention of publishing it soon. They just wanted leave proof of what has been lived, what has been learned, of everything that can be done rebuild when love is more stronger than him fear. And although they didn't know, someone the more they would read it, they knew that at the very least, it would be a faithful testimony of how a father and a daughter were saved mutually. In one of those writing sessions shared, Paloma asked him, sometime there was hated Beatriz. Arturo lowered his gaze and took a long time in answering. "I don't know. Was hate. It was something more dense, sadder. It hurt me. Plus what you made you, what you could feel by her." Paloma nodded, as I already knew it. Then he wrote in his part of the notebook, "Sometimes, the people who should taking care of you are the ones that most damage do. But that doesn't mean one can't find new caregivers in a path." That phrase was left marked in both. From then on, they decided to include small reflections at the end of each chapter, as a kind of guide, emotional, for those who will cross situations similar. With the time, the book project was transformed into something else big. Emilia proposed, convert it in educational material, and Valeria offered to help in the edition. Gabriel managed a contact with a foundation that worked with children in risky situation, and they offered to finance the printing. When Paloma heard the news, she was in silence by some seconds. Then he said, "So we are not only going to count our history, let's help others write yours." Arturo hugged her tightly. Never thought that that one painful return, that image of a little girl eating from the dog's bowl, he would end up in something so luminous. And yet, there were. Writing, healing, helping, showing that the past does not disappear, but can turn into something useful if a new meaning is given to it. The day of the book launch was a lot further modest than some they expected, but exactly as Arturo and Paloma had done, dreamed. They organized it in his own restaurant, with tables pushed to the sides and chairs borrowed from the center community. There was no cameras, neither carpets red, just real people, some with stories similar, all with the heart willing. Paloma read a fragment in front of everyone, with voice firm but sweet, and when ended, the room erupted in applause. Arturo did not speak much. He just said, "If this serves for a single child to sit less alone, now it was worth it." It was an evening quiet, unpretentious, but deeply significant. The kind of night that is remembered all life without the need for photos. After the event, letters began to arrive. Some they came from other towns, others from cities large, many from families who had read his book in voice high with their children. One teacher wrote, "Thank you. Forgive me tools to detect his silence of my students." A mother said, "My daughter and I, we read together each page. We cried, but we also laughed. Now we sleep embraced." Each letter was a confirmation that your history had not been in vain. Paloma used to read them in voice high before sleeping, and some kept under his pillow as were talismans. Arthur, each time I saw a new letter, repeated the same thing. One more that tells us that we are doing the right thing. And so, with each the world's response, its little universe expanded a little more. Over the months, the restaurant began to receive visits unexpected. One day it came an older woman who said have been friends with Arturo's mother, with tears in the eyes for seeing he to the child that a time took care of. Another day, a young man with his son of 5 years in arms asked talk to Paloma because needed to see with his own eyes that it can be done, get out of fear. None of them was rejected. Arturo and Paloma had built not just a business, but a refuge. A space where the stories could to tell without shame, where the pain had place, but it also had laughter, play, warm bread, and the silences respectful. What began as a kitchen to survive had been turned in a group home. One afternoon, cloudy, Gabriel proposed to her to Arthur to found a small NGO based in her restaurant to support children victims of abuse and their families. Arturo didn't hesitate. He named it Casa Paloma at Valeria's suggestion, and they registered the initiative as a space for listening, legal guidance, and activities artistic for healing. Emilia was in charge of coordinating the workshops, and in few months now, they had volunteers from different parts of the country. Paloma painted the logo, a white dove coming out of a cage broken, with a sun in his background. Every detail was thought with love, not for marketing, but because they understood that even the symbols could embrace. And so, what there was, it's been hell in he. The past became, day by day, a beacon for others. Casa Paloma was not long in coming and attract the attention of media and organizations international. A foundation, European, specialized in childhood, offered to fund an exchange program for Arturo and Paloma to share his experience in others' communities. Arturo hesitated, not because fear of speaking, but for not wanting to get away from your people's eyes of their kitchen, of his routine. But Paloma, with her wisdom precocious, he said to him, "Dad, if you don't speak, there will be other child waiting for someone to rescue him." Those words convinced him, so they began to travel once a month to towns and cities where his history opened doors, removed hearts and woke up questions, never gave chair. They only told what they experienced and how they dealt with it. During a chat in a rural school, the girl finally stood up and asked, "And how do you cure it? Fear?" Paloma, without thinking a lot, he replied, "With time, hugs, and someone who looks at you like, yeah, you were the most important in the world." Arturo added nothing. He knew that in that phrase was condensed all the struggle, all the tenderness, and all the transformation that had lived. After that talk, the school principal wrote a letter thanking them not only for the visit, but also for the hope they had sown. "In times where all seems noise and speed, you, us, they taught us to look calmly," he said. Arturo put it away. In a box next to other letters, photos and drawings, it was his treasure. Not out of nostalgia, but because in each paper was written proof that sustained love can change realities. On one of his trips, Arthur was invited to a forum of ex-military personnel in social reintegration process. It was an event large, with many speeches, technicians, and little emotion. When it was his turn speaking, put aside, he texted, that there was prepared and started with a phrase simple: "I did not come to talk about the war we wage with weapons, but about the one we face when we're coming back." From there, he narrated his story, slowly, without embellishment. When he finished, there was a deep silence. Then one of the assistants stood up, approached, and hugged him. "Thank you for reminding me that even I can be more than just a uniform. Empty," he told him. Arturo understood then that your paper in that forum, it was not just about giving testimony, but open a door that many did not know as cross. Meanwhile, in the town, Paloma followed growing. I already had 12 years, and every day showed a unique sensitivity and strength. One Sunday, while they were walking on the beach, he asked her to Arturo. Yes, he thought in death. "Sometimes," he replied him, without drama. "But when I do it, it reassures me to know that you let, in a world where you know how to take care of yourself and take care of others, to others." Paloma looked at him in silence, then took his hand and said, "Then you don't worry. I will know that to do." It was a conversation short, but loaded with meaning. Arthur didn't need more to feel in peace. Seeing her safe, bright, able to talk about the future without fear, was all that sometime there was dreamed in the dark days of the battlefront. One morning, Arturo found Paloma sitting on the terrace with his notebook diary on the legs and one serious expression. "I want meet my mum," he said bluntly. Arturo stayed still for a second, not because there wasn't anticipated that moment, but because I didn't know as handle it. "Do you want to see her or know about her?" he asked calmly. Paloma thought about it and replied, "Both." Arturo explained that his mother had gone when she was very small, and that, "Never tried resume contact. I don't know where is, nor he wants to see you," she admitted. Paloma didn't cry. She just said, "So I want to know why, what he didn't want." There was no rancor in his voice, just need to understand. And Arturo, like always, he was committed to help her search answers, although that would involve removing painful parts of the past. During the weeks following, with the help of Gabriel, they began to track information. It was not easy. Paloma's mother had moved several times and lived now in other country. Finally, they managed contact an aunt distant who gave them a number. Arturo hesitated before dialing, but he did. The conversation, it was brief, tense, with more silences than words. The woman, knowing that Paloma wanted to see her, agreed to talk to her by video call. When the moment arrived, Arturo stayed in background, watching. Paloma sat down in front of the screen, with the heart accelerated. The image appeared, a woman with a tired face, surprised to see the girl she had left back. "Hi, Mom," Paloma said in a calm voice. The other women took time to answer. "Hello, Paloma," he murmured. And in that instant, everything was left suspended in the air. The conversation between Paloma and her mother was brief, awkward, full of pauses, uncomfortable. There were no reproaches, neither tears, just simple questions and answers vague. "Why tea? Were you there?" Paloma asked. "I wasn't there, prepared. I didn't know how to be a mother," she replied. She looked down. Paloma nodded, as if that it would be enough. I wasn't looking for comfort, neither explanations deep. I just wanted check with your own eyes that there was no abandonment. It was his fault. After finishing the call, he was left in silence by several minutes. Then he got up, went towards Arturo and hugged him tightly. I don't need it anymore, further answers, she said. Arturo hugged her back. He moved for the maturity of his daughter by his ability to close cycles with a dignity that he had taken years reach. That day, Paloma wrote a page different in his diary. He didn't talk about pain or the past, but about the future. Today, I understood that there are things that cannot be changed, but that doesn't stop me choose that do with what I feel. From that moment on, his energy was dumped still further at Casa Paloma, organized new activities, created a support space between adolescents, and proposed open a small library with books about health, emotional, and resilience. Emilia and Valeria helped her coordinate the donations, and in less than 2 months, the space already was full of colors, cushions, and words that invited healing. Arturo observed all from the kitchen with a mixture of pride and amazement. He knew that his daughter had not only survived, he had converted into a beacon for many others. With the project progressed, requests began to arrive from other regions to replicate the Casa Paloma experience. Arturo showed reluctant at first. I didn't want to convert his home in a franchise, neither lose his spirit intimate that they had built. But Paloma, with her usual clarity, proposed something different, to create a network of homes, symbolic spaces inspired in his history, but adapted to local needs. It was not about copying, but about inspiring. So the Paloma Network was born, an initiative collaborative that connected to educators, psychologists, volunteers, and families in a mission common: protect childhood, give voice to silence, and build homes insurance from the community. Each node in the network received a box with materials: books, guides, emotional, written letters by Paloma, Arturo's recipes, and a wooden dove graffiti by a child from the center community. It was not a program rigid, but an invitation to create, to listen, to care. In one of the meetings annual, one voluntary told as his son, a victim of bullying, had found comfort reading the story of the girl who lived in a house without windows. Another women's story, how Arthur's bread recipe had served to start conversations difficult with their daughter teenager. And so, between testimonies and hugs, Arturo understood that the seed that he and Paloma had planted not only there was germinated, was giving fruits in places that never imagined reach. As time goes by, things began to calm down. Life in the people continued his course naturally, but now there was a feeling of serene fullness in the air. Paloma, with 13 years already compliments, became in a young, active, creative, and empathetic, admired by her peers and respected by the adults. Arturo, by his part, recovered something that neither, not even I, knew there was lost: the right to live without being defensive. He no longer woke up startled. He didn't even feel it obliged to protect each corner of the world. There was learned to trust, to let go, to breathe without feeling that something terrible was by happen. The wounds did not disappear, but they stopped bleeding, and that, for him, was more than enough. One afternoon, while they walked on the beach, Paloma asked him, sometime, thought that everything this I would be possible. Arturo smiled and replied, no, I was just thinking in survive the next day. She laughed and took his hand. Well, look how far we arrived. That phrase was left floating in the wind, like an affirmation, simple but powerful. They were no longer a desperate father and a little girl, broken. They were two survivors who had elected build something new, not perfect, not without scars, but real. That night, Arturo returned to open his notebook, the one I thought finished, and wrote a line more. Sometimes the impossible just needs a little time and a reason enough strong enough not to give up. The story they had written together finally was published by a publishing House that respected every word, every illustration of Paloma, each fragment testimonial. The book was translated into several languages, and although they were not looking for fame, they began to receive invitations to participate at literature fairs and conferences about childhood and panels about resilience. In one of those, occasionally, in Buenos Aires, a young man approached Paloma with a copy underlined and filled with post-its. "Thank you for giving me permission to speak," she said. Through tears, Paloma, who had already learned not to put nervous in public, just hugged her and said, You had voice. You just needed an echo." Arturo, seeing that scene, he understood something he hadn't fully understood. His daughter, I didn't need it anymore as a shield, but as partner. There was grown, and had made without losing his tenderness, neither his clarity. That night, in the hotel room, she proposed to him an unexpected idea, writing a second part of the book, but this time with testimonies from others' children, other parents, other survivors. "May it not be just ours history, let it be a choir." Arturo agreed without thinking. He knew he had arrived time to expand his story, to open his space for new voices. Because if there was anything learned in all along that path, it was that healing is not an individual destination. It's a journey shared, a construction collective made of many stories that embrace each other. The second part of the book, it took a year and be completed. They gathered testimonies from different corners of the country, some brief, others heartbreaking, all of them authentic. Paloma was in charge of illustrating each chapter with drawings symbolic, a flower coming out of a crack, a little girl flying about a broken house, a hug in the shape of a house. Arturo checked the texts with the same "be careful what you need" bread, slowly, respectfully. At the end of the book, they included a letter addressed "to whom still this in the dark," written for both. In it they said, "Don't you we know, but we believe, you are not alone, and yes, you can go out." The book was presented in an international book fair, children and youth. The room was full. There was children, teenagers, parents, educators, psychologists. Arturo and Paloma sat down in front of everyone, with the themselves nerves than the first time, but with a security different. That which is born from knowing oneself useful. At the end of the presentation, a girl of about 8 years, he raised his hand. "And you who they are when they are not there writing books?" Paloma smiled and replied, "I am a girl who one day played again." Arturo looked at her and added, "And I, a father who learned to care without a uniform." The room erupted in applause, but for them the most important was not a noise, but the looks they found when they stepped off the stage. Looks that said, "Thank you." Looks that said, "Now I understand." With each new step, Paloma and Arturo maintained a promise tacit, not to forget where you come from. They came. Despite the travels, the books and the recognitions, each returning to the village was a return to the roots. They continued cooking together, organizing workshops, playing with the children from the center community. Casa Paloma continued being a refuge, not only for others, but also for themselves. It was not unusual to see Paloma giving guitar lessons on the terrace while Arturo prepared empanadas for everyone. They lived with just enough, without luxuries, but with the abundance emotional than many they envied, because had discovered that the true home has nothing to do with the size of a house, but with the security of knowing that you are loved. One day, while checking a box ancient, Arthur found the doll dressed as a soldier who had brought from Europe the day he returned from the front. It was stored among blankets, intact. He took it to where there was Paloma, who was no longer a little girl, and handed it to her without a word. She took it carefully, looked at it for a long time and said, "I thought it had gone lost." Arturo shook his head. "I was just expecting a moment correct." Paloma put it on the dining room shelf among books, drawings and letters. "Here goes to be okay," he murmured. And in that gesture, simple, almost imperceptible, they closed other circle. Not all the objects keep memoirs happy, but some, when they redefine themselves, can become in symbols of everything we were able to overcome. Paloma, now teenager, began to interest by psychology with more depth. He signed up in courses in line, read compulsively, and took questions in a notebook that he titled Things I Want Understand. Arturo supported her in everything, although sometimes I did not understand well the terms he used. One night, while they washed the dishes, she told him, "I don't want study to heal my past. I want study so that others do not have to carry one like he mine." That phrase stuck with him engraved. It was a reminder of how far they had arrived, but also that his history was no longer just his. It had become converted in engine for the future of others. In a school talk, Paloma shared something that left everyone in silence. Abuse is not always. Screams, sometimes whispers, sometimes disguised as routine, but always leaves footprints. His maturity and his clarity inspired teachers, parents, and classmates. Arturo, sitting at the back of the auditorium, watched her with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. He remembered the little girl, curled up in a floor, eating from the dog's bowl, and barely could believe that he was the same person as now spoke with so much force. When finished, the teacher approached him and said, "Thank you for breed to someone so brave." Arturo smiled and replied, "She raised herself. I was only there so as not to leave her fall." And that, he thought after, there was been his greatest achievement. To support without imposing, to accompany without nullifying. The impact of Casa Paloma continued growing. Universities, they began to use their history as case study in social work, psychology, and law courses. Documentaries, articles, academics, and conferences were based in that small restaurant that once was a place where a father and a daughter, they started again. But neither Arturo nor Paloma changed. His routine, they followed, opening the local early, receiving neighbors, organizing snacks collective, and maintaining his same spirit of humility with which they had started. If they had anything learned was that the change does not begin with big things, speeches, but with actions, daily life of sustained love. One afternoon, while they walked through the town square, one little girl approached them with a drawing in his hand. It was a dove flying about a house with windows open. "It's for you," she said. Paloma bent down, hugged her, and thanked her. Arturo, in a voice slightly broken, asked him, yes, she knew that meant that dove. "Yes," said the girl, "I don't have it anymore, fear." It was one of those moments that do not need explanation, that they stay engravings in the soul. That night, at home, they hung up he drawing alongside so many others. And as they did so, Arturo thought that there was no monument, medal, neither recognition that could match the simple truth of those words. Subscribe now. Really, because each new subscriber is a reason more to follow, giving voice to those who need it. As the years were passing by, Arturo began to write less and listen more. He became a silent mentor, a guide who did not impose, but who always was available. Paloma, in change, spoke more. He dreamed in voice high, planned study in the capital but return every weekend. Even though it was hard for him, imagine the house without your presence daily, Arturo did not try stop her. "I knew that healthy love does not enclose, but accompanies from where be." In a conversation at night, she told him, "I'm not leaving to get away. I'm leaving to take what we built to others' places." And he, with his voice firm but wet eyes, he replied, "So that you flight is long and always you know return." The farewell was not sad but full of meaning. The people organized a small ceremony to say goodbye to her, with music, hugs, and written letters by the children. Paloma promised continue writing, continue drawing, follow helping. Arturo, from the door of the restaurant, saw her leave with a mixture of nostalgia and pride difficult to describe. Then he came back to enter, put on the apron, and began to prepare the bread of the day. Because life Doesn't stop, it just transforms. And every time someone crossed the door of Casa Paloma, I knew that, although his daughter was no longer physically there all the days, their essence continued present in each corner, in each history that dared to start over. On her first weekend back, Paloma brought with him a notebook full of ideas and brilliance distinct in the eyes. There were acquaintance to others young people with stories complex. There were heard stories of resilience and also of abandonment. He told her to Arturo, who wanted to create a podcast series where girls and adolescents could tell their stories safely, anonymously if they wanted to, but always with respect. Arturo listened to her in silence, with the heart puffed up with pride. "Do it," he said. "You know words have power." Paloma smiled. "I learned it from you." And so, without any big plans or budgets, Voices That Heal was born, a series that in few weeks began to circulate around schools, community radio stations and platforms digital. The first episode was recorded from his fourth, with the microphone that Gabriel gave him and a hanging blanket on the wall to improve his sound. It was titled "The First Time They Heard Me," and it was their history, told with a calm that moved. It was not a testimony full of drama, but a calm, firm, brave narration. Arturo listened to him in the kitchen, with the earphone stalls, while the empanadas were baking. When they were finished, he stayed some seconds in silence, with his eyes closed. Then he went out into the yard, breathed deep, and wrote in his notebook a new line: "My daughter has found his voice, and with it, there is shining beacons in the darkness of others." From that day on, each new episode was a reason for a meeting at Casa Paloma. They listened, reflected, and above all, everything. They remembered that the stories shared heal more than sometimes we imagine. With the time, Voices That Heal began to receive messages from other listeners' countries. Girls from Colombia, Peru, Mexico, and even Spain sent voice notes counting as those stories had given them strength to speak, to ask help, or simply feel less alone. Paloma listened each message with respect, took notes and answered whenever I could. Even some teachers, they began to use the episodes in their education classes. Emotional. Arturo observed this phenomenon with admiration and a bit of astonishment. He, never there, was imagined that one little girl silenced would go so far with his own voice. But I understood perfectly by how many felt touched. Paloma did not speak from the ego, but from the truth. One morning, while they had breakfast facing the sea, Paloma told him that she wanted to study abroad for a while. "I want to learn from others' models, bring new ideas to Casa Paloma, see his work in other parts." Arturo nodded. Without trying disguise, he knocked in the throat. I knew that. Raising well also meant letting fly. "I only have a condition," he said, "that you come back when you heart I asked you, not because obligation." Paloma responded with a smile and a kiss on the forehead. "Always, I'm back where they taught me to live without fear." It was one of those phrases that are not forgotten never, that are recorded on the skin as invisible tattoos. And so, a time moreover, Arturo prepared again a farewell that, although difficult, it was full of meaning. Before leaving for abroad, Paloma organized a special event at Casa Paloma. It wasn't a party or a formal farewell. It was a circle of words, like those who used to do in the workshops with children. They brought together volunteers, friends, neighbors, and former beneficiaries of the project. One by one, they shared what Casa Paloma had meaning to them. There were tears, laughter, long silences, and sustained hugs. Finally, Paloma spoke. "This place isn't mine or my dad's. It belongs to everyone. Those who sometime they felt they were worthless, and here they learned that their history matters." Arturo didn't speak. He just looked at her with an open soul, with that love without ties that only the parents who have passed because of war, literal and emotional, they know give. After the meeting, while they cleaned together his living room, Paloma found a handwritten note among the flowers that decorated his space. It said, "Thank you for being the example that I needed to trust again." I didn't have signature. Arturo read it too, and they both stayed in silence, contemplating the power of a phrase anonymous. Then, without needing to say anything else, they hit her on the kitchen wall, next to everyone the reminders that had accumulated over the years, because they knew that those small tokens of gratitude were further valuable than any trophy. They were the confirmation silent that love, when sown with patience, always leaves fingerprint. Already installed in other country, Paloma maintained regular contact with Arturo. Video calls became rituals, the Sundays at noon, with mate in hand and some anecdote to share. Arturo told him about the restaurant's news, about the new drawings hanging by the children, about the Casa Paloma's progress. Paloma, by his part, I was talking to him about the courses, from her new friends, from ideas she wanted bring back. Despite the distance, the bond continued intact, as a rope firm, between two hearts that knew exactly as hold on, and each every time they hung up, Arturo stayed looking at the screen, turned off with a smile, melancholic, because although I missed her with each fiber, also knew that its daughter was where I had to be, flying. One day, Paloma sent an email to Gabriel, Emilia, Valeria, and Arturo with a proposal. I wanted to organize a conference international about childhood resilient based in his hometown, not in a big city, not in a capital. I want people come where began everything, he wrote. The idea excited everyone. Within a few months, they began the preparations. Experts, activists, survivors, and educators from different countries were contacted. The restaurant became an operations center, schools offered as headquarters for workshops, and the neighbors donated accommodation for the guests. It was like, yeah, all the people will mobilize, not for fame nor money, but by he proud to be part of a story that there was touched so many lives. On the day of the opening of the Congress, the people woke up different. The streets were adorned with penance facts by the children. The local businesses displayed posters with phrases such as "Welcome to Casa Paloma" and "Where the stories heal." Arturo put on his best shirt, the one Paloma had given him before leaving, and walked to the center community with a mixture of nerves and joy. Upon arriving, he saw his daughter in he stage, welcoming, in 3 languages, with the same naturalness with which years back there was drawn in silence in a corner. When she looked at him between the public and winked at him, he felt that everything he journeyed, from the war until that moment, had had a clear purpose. During the 3 days of the event, roundtables and workshops were held, artistic conferences and reflection meetings. The stories shared were hard, but also full of light. Children who had emerged from abandonment, adults who had healed their wounds, teachers who had learned to hear further beyond the notes, school children. Paloma moderated some panels and participated in others as listener. Arturo, although I was trying to stay out of it, was invited to close the day with a brief intervention. He walked onto the stage with calm steps, looked at everyone and said, "I am not here as expert nor as hero. I am here as someone who one day did not know that to do and chose stay." That phrase, so simple and honest, was received with an ovation that needed no words. The closing of the Congress was a hike symbolic by the people, led by Paloma and the children from the center community. Each one carried a paper dove with a message handwritten. "You are not alone. Your story matters. You can always start over again," they said some. At the end of the journey, they released the pigeons into the wind from the beach. They didn't fly far away. Some fell into the sea. Others were left caught in the sand, but his gesture was what counted. Arturo, standing next to Gabriel, watched in silence. "Any time did you think they would go this far?" he asked the friend. Arturo smiled with shining eyes. "Never. I was just thinking in which she was alive." That day he understood that love, when it does not give up, can multiply until it embraces the world whole. Return. At home, after the event, Paloma and Arturo sat down on the terrace to look the sea. They didn't say much. The silence between them was comfortable, Full of meaning, Paloma rested her head on he. He took his father's shoulder and murmured, "I think we're okay." Arturo responded with a kiss on the forehead. "We always were, only now we know." That night, while I was sleeping in his ancient room, Arturo returned to open his notebook. Almost there, he had none left pages, but still, so wrote Amor, "There is no war harder than that which is fought by inside. And there is no victory sweeter to see smile at the person you once had to rescue." As the months passed, Paloma decided to stay a little longer in the town before resuming his studies in a foreigner. I wanted leverage. He Congress's push to strengthen local activities, to leave new volunteers trained, and about everything, enjoy the tranquility that only your home could offer him. They returned the long breakfasts, guitar afternoons, and visits, spontaneous calls from neighbors who came with questions, stories, or simply desire to share a coffee. Arturo, although I knew that his daughter I would leave again, I would take advantage each moment as if it were him last, not since he fear of loss, but from gratitude by everything experienced. One afternoon, while ordered books in the library community, Paloma found the story that there was written as a girl, the girl who lived in a house without windows. He read it in silence, caressing each page with the fingers. Then he handed it to a girl who was watching her from the door. "Take it, it's yours." Now, the girl, surprised, pressed him against her chest as if it were a treasure. Arthur, who watched from far away, he understood at that moment that Paloma had closed his own circle. There was turned the pain in bridge, the wound in path, memory in legacy. I no longer needed carry with him history, now could offer it as a beacon for others, small ones that still were looking for his window to the world. That gesture, simple, deliver his first story, became symbol of a new stage. From then, each time that a girl or boy shared something important at Casa Paloma, I would receive a book, a letter, or a drawing that Paloma had created with the years, not like reward, but as reminder, your voice mattered. Paloma started calling him the archive of courage, and with the help of others, young people, created a small exposure itinerant with the objects further, significant of her years of struggle and healing. The exhibition toured rural schools, neighborhood fairs, and centers cultural. Arturo sometimes accompanied, other times simply observed from a distance, knowing that every step of his daughter was also a victory shared. One night, at a family dinner with Emilia, Gabriel, and Valeria, Paloma proposed something unexpected, that everyone write a letter addressed to his me from the past. It wasn't meant to be published, not even to share it necessarily, just to close cycles. That night, in his silence of his fourth, Arthur took paper and pencil and wrote, "You didn't know what was coming. You thought that the uniform tee would protect from everything, but not from the pain of your daughter. And yet so, you chose stay. Thanks for not running away." When he finished, he folded the sheet of paper and put it between the pages of the notebook he carried. Years filling. I didn't know, someday I would read it again, but I understood that writing it was, a way to heal. Paloma also wrote his letter. He read it in voice discharged the next day during a workshop with teenagers. "Dear me, it wasn't your fault. You weren't weak. You were just small. Thank you for resisting so as not to forget how the flowers were drawn. Continue believing that a hug could save you. You had reason. One yes can start over." The room was left in silence. Some girls cried, others simply they squeezed strong their own diaries. Arturo, who was in the background, took a deep breath. He didn't interrupt, he didn't hug, he didn't correct. He just let his daughter shine with its own light without needing its protective shadow. It was his moment, and there was earned with every step taken. Since that day, he found her folded next to the dog's bowl. A few days later, Paloma was invited to record a special episode for a documentary series about youth. Resilient, the film crew, he arrived in the village, interviewed volunteers, recorded scenes in a restaurant, captured moments on the beach where she used to walking as a girl. Arturo participated briefly, but asked not to be the focus. "This is your history now," he said firmly. The episode, it was a success, and although brought further visibility, Paloma made it clear that she was not looking for fame. "My story is just one among many. If it helps another little girl find the exit, and now it's okay." And that phrase, recorded at the end of the chapter, became campaign slogans, banners and messages on social media. But for Arturo, it was still being simply that, the voice of his daughter, free at last. With the time, Arthur was delegating further responsibilities of the restaurant to the young people of the town. "Not because we're tired, but because I understood that the legacies do not stand alone. They are shared." He dedicated more hours to write, to walk, to listen. He began to give workshops for parents on as a company without invading, how hold without controlling. He did not speak as expert, but as a man who committed mistakes and learned in time. "There are no recipes," he used to say, "but if there is something that never failure is to stay." Their encounters were not massive, but who attended were leaving different. Like Ye would have received permission to feel, to make mistakes, to start over with your own children. One afternoon, Paloma returned from abroad with a backpack full of books and a proposal: create a school community based in art, listening active and education emotional. Not to replace schools traditional, but to complement them, to fill the voids that so many children they dragged in silence. Arturo listened, scratched his beard, smiled tenderly and said, "I knew you were up to something." And without thinking a lot, he started calling his friends, moving contacts, offer he restaurant as a starting point. Because if there was something learned in those years, was that the dreams that are born from pain, when watered with love, never stop blooming. The school community took shape more faster than they imagined. Fathers, mothers, young people, even grandparents volunteered as volunteers. Paloma organized the modules, contacted educators, and designed the learning spaces. Arturo, from the kitchen, prepared snacks and listened to the conversations that took place by his dining room converted in the classroom. There was music classes, writing, meditation, drawing, and most important, spaces where the children could speak without fear, knowing that they would be heard. One day, an 8-year-old girl, he raised his hand and said, "Here I feel that way, it matters what I think." And that phrase, so simple, was celebrated as if it were a diploma. When inaugurated officially the school, Paloma chose a hanging phrase at the entrance: "We didn't come here to forget what hurt, but to learn to live with it without it taking away our laughter." Arturo helped nail the sign with firm hands. It wasn't just a phrase. It was the synthesis of everything they had built from that day when he returned from the front and saw his daughter in her floor. There was nothing left trace of the cold house, of the aunt absent from silence tax. Now there was a place full of voices, of play, of hope. And that, thought Arthur, was more than justice. It was redemption. Years later, when Arturo was already had his hair completely white and Paloma was a women maid and right, someone asked him which there was been he moment further important of your life. He thought in many things. In war, in denunciation, in Paloma's first hug, in he restaurant, at school. But in the end, he said, "The day my daughter looked at me and I knew I was done fear, because understood that everything else, the achievements, the recognitions, the books, were consequence of that moment accurate in the one she stopped being afraid and began to live freely." Dove, by his part, continued expanding his scope of its work. There was formed a network of young people facilitators, traveled to different countries and shared panels with figures important, but each time they asked him by his inspiration, always he responded the same: "My dad, because he never left, because he stayed, even when I didn't know as do it. And because it taught me that sometimes staying is already changing a life." His story was not told as a tragedy, but as a possibility, as a way of showing that even in the midst of horror, tenderness sprouts. In it, last anniversary of Casa Paloma. While they blew out the candles on a cake made by the children, Paloma and Arturo looked at each other and smiled. They didn't need say nothing. They knew it, everything. They knew they had traveled a path unthinkable, that they had fallen and had up more than one time, and that what they had built was not just for them. It was for each child that sometime thought he was alone. To every parent who didn't know by where start, and about everything, to remind the world that it does not. It needs to be perfect to be a home. Thanks for Get Here. If something in this history did feel, please subscribe to the channel. Your subscription is what allows continue sharing these voices with the world.